everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. My goal here is to help us all connect, inspire, and create. Every week, a new guest joins us to share a bit of inspiration, creativity, and tips on how you can improve your photography portfolio. Upcoming presentations can be found on my website at lindanickell.com. Under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to my YouTube channel and our community blog. Elaine Pruden is here tonight to monitor the stuff that goes on behind the scenes and is the content editor of the Happiness Hour community blog. Say hello, Elaine.
Hello, everybody.
My guest tonight is Jose Madrigal. Jose is a Houston-based macro photographer who has mastered the art of photographing the tiny world of pollinators. The detail that Jose captures of these fascinating creatures is nothing short of jaw-dropping. His portraits of these essential pollinators are tech-sharp, detailed, and an invitation into their tiny world. Last summer, Jose shared his macro tips and techniques in a presentation called Pollinators Magnified Macro Photography, and you can find that session on the YouTube channel. In tonight's presentation, Finishing Touches, Jose will teach his methods for post-processing images. He'll talk about everything from cropping to exposure adjustments to enhancing, sharpening, denoising, and more. If you find your images lack the luster and pop of the great photos you admire, better post-processing and finishing touches are likely the missing keys to bringing your shots to life. So follow along as Jose walks through his entire process of editing raw files in Lightroom, down to post-ready images. So welcome back, Mr. Madrigal.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm okay. We got to catch up for just a few minutes before we all started. So what have you been doing since your last appearance here? Go ahead, brag. If you don't, I will.
Well, that was really put me on a different trajectory than I was planning on, which was kind of good during the COVID shutdown, because obviously a lot of things changed for a lot of people, and getting started doing webinars with doing the Zoom meeting with you kind of opened up the doors for me to get a relationship with Nickell Optics USA. And I've ended up doing a couple of webinars for them in partnership with B&H Photo as well. I've got another one I'll be doing at the end of the month. If those folks that maybe missed the one that I did for you last summer, it's going to be a little more along those lines of how I capture insects in flight. I'm calling it macro on the wing. So it's going to be real dialed in just to all of the techniques, specifically what I do in camera. I don't think I got as deep into that when I did the presentation with you last year, because I was just kind of trying to cover macro in general with a little bit of emphasis on that. But yeah, like I said, it's just really sent me down this different path that the thing that I've liked about photography since I got into it is that I feel like that I became an artist again. As a kid, I was a sketch artist, and then I got into the guitar, and always thought that I would be either a musician or an artist of some type. But I went to school, got a degree in an unrelated field so that I could have that safe job to fall back on, and ended up finding a career actually in an unrelated field. But it was something that I was really passionate about, and I think I was able to express myself creatively through that passion because I started my own business, and anybody who has done that knows that it's a creative outlet. But once it reached a point where it was successful and I wasn't having to really do as much creatively, I started missing that. And so as I got into photography, like I said, I really started feeling myself be an artist again. And that's really where my passion lies within photography, is creating art. And so I wasn't as much thinking about teaching, but as you invited me and as these opportunities have opened up, I'm like, I enjoy doing this. I think because of my background, I'll tell everybody right now, my career that I ended up building a business out of, I became a personal trainer around the age of 30. so 20 years ago. And then I ended up opening up my own studio, which is now 2 large gyms in the Houston area. And because of my background as a trainer, I think it really helped me out a lot with doing these webinars and things where I like to watch people succeed. I know when I first got into photography and I would ask people that I admired on Instagram, well, how did you do that? And, the response was practice or, persistence, things like that. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I just got to keep practicing. And so I figured a lot of these things out on my own. And I think that there's a certain tendency with, especially when people have a certain specialty, to want to kind of hold it to their best and not give up their secrets. But to me, I like to share and watch other people be successful. And so I think that also has come through in my presentations and in what I'm doing here. So yeah, like I said, it's been neat to have this new angle on what I do with photography.
Yeah. And you absolutely do. I mean, I got that from the first conversation we had. It's like you love what you're doing, but you love teaching, and you can tell. I mean, I look at the comments that people make on your post and your responses to them. It's all about encouraging other people to do what they want to do too. So that's one of the reasons that I was really tickled the first time you said yes, you'd come, and then the second time I really didn't give you a choice. It's like, so when are you coming back? And so I'm still tickled that you didn't say, no, I don't want to do that. So I really appreciate, again, it's time. It takes a lot of time to put these presentations together, and to do it for people that you don't know personally. Maybe some of the people in the room, you're starting to recognize their names and stuff, but it
I actually met up with Ben Cowan, and I met up at a park here last fall, I guess it was.
Yeah.
Time's been a bit of a blur the last 8 months. So.
The whole year's been a blur, so Don't worry. But once COVID is, over and done with, you're probably going to see a few more of us going, "Hey, can we tag along?" And I'm going to be one of those people. So
I'll go ahead and say now, I didn't even think about it, but one of the things that I'm hoping to do around the Memorial Day weekend is host a live workshop out in the field. There's nothing like being out there in the field, and particularly with what I do. I didn't set out to be a photographer who can do something that nobody else can do. But I know that with capturing the insects in flight, it is definitely a unique skill. I've figured out, and I have people all the time ask me how I do it. And it's one thing to read it or to, hear about it, but it's another thing to actually be out there in the field. And when you see the things that I see and realize that, that's a moment when you need to try to capture it in flight, and using the right techniques, it'll take a lot of the mystery out of it and make it what seems impossible start seeming a little bit possible. So.
And for me, I'm a visual learner. I can read all about it. I can watch it on YouTube, but to actually be next to somebody and they're saying, look, this is what behavior I'm looking for. This is when you hit the button. And for some reason, it just clicks a little easier when you're next to somebody and they're showing you. It really makes a difference. So I can't emphasize those in-person workshops or lessons, any more than just find somebody that you like what they're doing. And if they teach classes, sign up for one, because it really makes an impact on your final product and your process. So, okay. So you're thinking about doing that over Memorial Weekend?
Yeah. I think I just need to go ahead and announce it. Yeah. I think it would be an easy weekend for people to do. And that's also kind of prime time for certain types of situations that I look for. I've got a property out near Bryan College Station that I do a lot of my photography at, and that's where I want to host it. The great thing about that spot is that it's You don't have to worry about asking for permission. You don't have to worry about stepping, like at a botanical garden where you're not supposed to step on things, you know, and you'll be able to step on things, and you'll be able to see, like I said, exactly what it is that I look for, and these situations that allow you to capture these moments that, like I said, that when you look at it just as a picture, you're like, wow, how in the world? Because I know I used to think the same thing. How in the world do you do that? And I remember for the first few months of trying it and just struggling, and just every once in a while getting one that was okay. But when I, like I said, when that finally had that light bulb moment of, this is what I need to be looking for, and it just completely changed. I don't waste my time shooting at moments that I know aren't going to be doable. And now I do challenge myself. Now I go after some shots that probably a couple of years ago would have been extremely difficult or hard, and I'm better because of the practice that I've done with the more doable moments. But yeah.
So how about this? Because I'm already getting, Linda, make sure you do this. So how about when you get those details available, if you will, I know you'll share it on your Instagram, but will you send me that and I'll share it either at a meeting or even I might even post about it. So my 10 followers will know about it. So there is one question. So, and to keep in mind is maybe let us know how many attendees, if you're going to limit that, so that you might fill it up tonight just with the people in the room. You never know. Right. But when you get that far, I know it's still, you've got another month and a half. So when you get there, let me know if you don't mind sharing, and I'll get it. I'll get it out too. I have a big mouth apparently. So
yeah, everybody in this group will get a discount.
Woo! All right, so let's get started, because I know that several people have said, I'm really excited to see how he does this. So okay. I'll shut up and you take over.
All right, let's do this. Yeah. So first off, before I get into sharing my screen and talking about the techniques, I wanted to preface it by saying that what I was saying earlier, as far as being an artist, I think that's the most important thing for each of you guys to figure out for yourself is how you're going to be an artist with your photos. Don't you have to copy a little bit other people at first to learn techniques and to learn skills, but try to very quickly adopt those skills and techniques to your own photography. And that's what, because like I've had people share pictures with me on Instagram and say, what do you think of this? And my response to them is always, what do you think of it? Are you happy with it? And if you're happy with it, then I think it's great. And if you're not happy with it, I don't like to tell people how they should edit their photos. I don't like to tell people which of their photos are good. However, if there's something that you're trying to get from your photos and you're not getting it, I'll be more than happy to share techniques that you can try to get that result. But like I said, I'm never going to be the guy that's going to tell you, oh, you should change this or you should change that, because then it starts becoming my art, and I don't want to do somebody else's art for them. Art should be your thing, and it should inspire you, and it should make you feel good doing it. So know that, like I said, as I go through what I'm explaining how I approach editing a photo, and hopefully these techniques you can borrow with your own photos, whether they be of close-up macro photography or of a landscape or of a person, whatever. You can hopefully borrow these techniques and just try them. Don't be afraid to experiment and do some different things to get what you want out of your pictures. So, I almost pushed leave.
I'm laughing only because every once in a while I see that button. I'm like, oh, don't hit it. Don't hit it. Yeah.
All right. Share screen. There we go. That's the one I want. All right. Okay. So hopefully everybody is seeing the screen there now. And as Linda alluded to earlier, Yeah, I would love for you guys to follow along as I edit the photo. If you've got it loaded up on Lightroom. If you don't have Lightroom, I'll try to talk as much as possible in terms that you can still use on a basic phone editor, but there's some things that you're just not going to be able to do on a basic phone editor. So unfortunately, I won't have a solution for everything, but feel free to ask the questions if you don't have Lightroom. If I cover something, I'll see if I can think of a way that you can try to address that without Lightroom. So anyway, like I said, if you're not able to follow along as we're doing it, definitely watch the YouTube once it's available, and you can follow along. You've got access to the raw files so you can see it. That was the thing I was telling Linda before we started, is that I really wanted you guys to, rather than just watch me do it, I wanted you guys to be able to do the process yourself on your own computer, because you learn a lot more if you do it. But also so that you can actually see the results on Zoom and all these things. The screen sometimes it pixelates, or it just doesn't have the kind of resolution that you need to get what you want. So some people, I think, have a first thing that they always do. I kind of have it's just kind of a gut reaction when I first look at a picture as to what I want to do first, but it usually is going to be the temperature, or the exposure, or the crop. You know, I'm going to look at one of those few things as a thing that I want to do first. And I also chose specifically a photo that is in natural light, because there's a lot more things to deal with when you're shooting in natural light than when you're controlling the light. I've got pictures that I take with a diffuser, as you guys know, and you get a much closer to the finished product right in camera. But if you're taking pictures in natural light, as you guys know, you can't always control the environment. And especially when you're shooting at living creatures that are moving around with changing backgrounds, you don't always have the ability to control how that's going to be. So being able to post-process is important. So one of the first things that I look at in this picture when I look at it is that the bee is a little bit underexposed and the background is a little bit overexposed. It's like it's glaring with the way that the background looks, and not really allowing me to really focus in on the primary subject, which is the bee. And so right away I start thinking that that's one of the things that I want to be able to address. Also, it feels a little bit warm to me. I tend to like to cool my pictures. Some people like a warmer look. I tend to like a little bit cooler on pictures. I also want to point out here that one of the I shoot in RAW all the time. When I first got the camera, I was shooting in JPEG just because I didn't know what the difference was, other than that it was much larger files. And I was like, well, I don't want to eat up all that space. What I ended up realizing is that when you shoot in RAW, not only do you have more data, but you have more tools within Lightroom as well to work with. Like, for example, with the temperature, as I adjust it here, you can actually set the temperature. Whereas when you're working with a JPEG, you can just go down in increments of 1, 1, 2, 3. So it's not really a meaningful number. Whereas, like I said, you can set the temperature in Kelvin to a temperature specific that you want to get. So like I said, that's one of the things that I look at. I also look at, again, like I said, the exposure. I want the exposure to be right for the subject, not for the background. So I don't worry too much if I end up overexposing the background a little bit. I will say that in shooting as well, don't worry more about having stuff be too dark than too bright. It's easier to fix overexposed than underexposed, because you typically have about 4 times as much information in the highlights as you do in the darks and in the shadows. So definitely, like I said, err on the side of trying to be a little bit overexposed versus being underexposed. So the next thing that I want to do, I also think a lot in terms of who my audience is going to be. And for this image, obviously being something that I wanted to share on Instagram, I always go to that 4:5 crop if I can, that 4:5 aspect ratio. And see how it's going to look there. If I feel like that it looks balanced, then I go with it like that. If I feel like that it's not balanced, or that it's too, and what I mean by balance is like looking at, you can see each of these flowers is kind of in 1/3, and then the bee is here in another third. So you got this little triangle here that creates a little bit of a feeling of balance in that picture, and that's for me. So that picture definitely worked. With another picture, it might work better as a square crop. It might work better as a horizontal crop, or as a longer. But the reason why I like the 4:5 aspect ratio for particularly for Instagram is that it uses the most amount of space on the screen, and really makes the images jump off the screen a little bit more, or pop a little bit more when people see them on the screen. If it's a different layout, if it's horizontal, it's just not going to jump out of the screen as much. And I want to grab people's eye. Sometimes I'll do a certain crop for Instagram, and then I'll do another crop for how I'm going to sell the photo or put it on my website or something like that. And that's okay too. Don't hesitate. Don't be afraid to do that with, like I said, it's your art. So do it that way. The next thing that I like to use are the whites. To me, the whites give the image a real vibrance. And so I typically will crank them up to somewhere between about 30 or 40. And it's really going to make the image pop a lot more. Like I talk about, I use that term a lot because, like I said, for me, I like the look, but I also know that part of why I like that look is because it grabs people's attention, and it's important for me as an artist to grab people's attention with my work. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and bring down the. I'm gonna put on my reading glasses a little bit so I can see a little bit better here. So I'm going to bring down the exposure, the contrast just a little bit, because as we talked about, the bee is a little bit underexposed and the background is a little bit overexposed. So I want to even it out a little bit like that. Later on, we'll get a little bit more into brushes as we go along here. Also want to bring up the shadows just a little bit. And as you can see already now, the bee is starting to look a little bit more consistent with the background. Bring down the highlights just a little bit, and you've got these meters over here that'll show you at the top of the screen here if you've got some areas that are a little bit overexposed. You can leave those on if you want. You see where all the areas that are a little bit overexposed. And what overexposed means is that if you were to go to print this picture, it would print just completely white with no details in it. And so if you're just going to be sharing it on Instagram, it may not really matter that much. But if you're going to want to make a print of it, then correcting those will definitely be a good idea later. So I'll leave that off for now just because it's distracting there. A recent addition to Lightroom is the texture slider, and I really like the texture slider a lot. It basically it's kind of like Sharpen. But it just makes details really kind of stand out a little bit more. And I use just a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity overall to the image. And then I'll touch it up a little bit more on the subject as well when I get in there a bit more. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, like with Lightroom, when you're shooting in RAW, you have available to you these profiles. You have color, landscape, portrait, standard, and vivid. And you can select one of these and right away see a different change in the in how it makes your image look. Sometimes my two favorites are landscape, because landscape makes the colors really pop, and it makes the contrast as well really pop. And then portrait or standard. Either one of those, portrait and standard, are pretty close to each other. And these give you really soft natural colors and tones. So think of landscape as a punchier one. It's going to be similar to vivid, but a little bit more subtle. And then, like I said, standard as being a little bit more of a natural looking colors and contrast and things like that. Going back there to landscape. Now you may want to control the vibrance a little bit when you add landscape as your profile. Bring it down just a little bit there, where I'm a little bit happier with that. Let's down this a little bit more. This over here. Sorry guys, give me just a second. I'm trying to move this screen so that I can see all of my sliders and everything a little bit better. All right. So another thing that next thing that I'll probably look at is adjusting the yellows, changing their hue a little bit, because again, like I said, I feel like that the background is a little bit too yellow. So I'll bring the yellows over a little bit more to the green. Get it a little bit closer to where I did on my finished product, and then I'll probably bring down their luminance as well, which is going to really darken up that background without necessarily having to do too much else. And I don't know if you guys can see right away that difference, but you can see how it just right away makes the bead just kind of stand out a little bit, quite a bit more, instead of just kind of being washed into the background over there. So then as far as sharpening and noise reduction, I zoom in and I look at my noise, how much noise I have in the image. This one being shot at ISO 3200 is fairly noisy. What I use as a standard is roughly the ISO, whatever the ISO amount is, that's gonna kind of be where I dial in my noise reduction. So if it's at ISO 3200, I'm gonna dial up the noise reduction to about 30. And that's a rule that I just kind of came up with on my own, but it seems to work. And then I'm going to increase the detail a little bit so that I bring back some of the detail after reducing the noise. Then after that, I'm going to go ahead and work on the sharpening a little bit. With sharpening, when I'm using an image like this where I've had to crop in, and sharpening is going to be different for different types of subjects. When you're shooting people, humans, when you're wanting things to look extremely natural and maybe not overly sharp, I definitely learned that in shooting, doing portrait photography, that people don't necessarily want to be overly sharpened. You see too many details of like pores in their skin and wrinkles and things like that. So a little bit of a softer look is more desirable when you're doing portraits. But when you're doing living creatures, and especially macro type of photography, I like to actually increase the amount of sharpness, and like I said, just really make those details pop. And so I'll take up the radius a little bit, and this is basically the size of the little pixels that it's adding. And then as far as the detail, if you hit the shift when you're switching, Okay, there we go. I was using the wrong button. So you want to hit the Alt, and that'll give you a black and white screen. And so it's going to let you see a little bit more specifically what is going to get, what details are going to get hit. So if you really crank this up, you'll see it starts adding a lot of, it's almost noise essentially that it's adding. It's adding sharpening to a lot of the image. And so dial that into the specific things that you want to add sharpening to. And then masking is going to work similarly. And so you don't necessarily want to sharpen the background. You just want to sharpen the bee and the details on the bee and on the flower. And as you can see, I typically am going to set that around 80 or so there. And then I'm going to go ahead and increase the sharpening just until it looks good to my eye. I take it up pretty high, usually about 80. Sometimes even a little bit higher than that, just depending on how cropped in. If I'm a little bit more cropped in, you're going to lose a little bit of detail and resolution. And so you're going to have to increase that through sharpening a little bit more when you get in working on the picture. And so now then when you zoom out, it's going to look more natural. Don't worry too much about, there's a lot of people that are that spend way too much time here and not enough time here. Think about the whole composition. Think about what it's going to look like as a finished product versus how it looks in there in all of those little details. Yeah, those details need to be right, but the composition is what needs to move people. And if you get certain details to pop and draw people's eye and all of that, then like I said, then you're getting a composition that that you'll be happy with. Let's see what temperature. So then you can also, one of the cool things that you can do in Lightroom, if you get to using certain sliders and certain techniques a lot, you can save them as presets. I've got a few presets saved. I had actually, when I first got into photography, I had downloaded a package that allowed me to have all these different presets. And then, like I said, I started learning to make my own. And so I've created some that I've saved in here, like this one that I call Insect Sharpener. And I've got an Insect Sharpener 2, one without brightening. And so I'll utilize that one. And as you can see, I've got a lot of texture and clarity. And I'm using the adjustment brush here with that to go over the bee. And like I said, to give it just a little bit more pop. Let me move myself out of the way here. About 50% here. And you guys will see how as you brush over some of these fine hairs on the bee, how it starts to make them stand out just a little bit more. And obviously you guys don't have this preset, but as you guys can see, the only thing that's on here is texture is up at 50. Clarity is at 20 and sharpness is at 10. So if you select your adjustment brush, and then you can modify any one of these other ones. You can select sharpness. Let me do it that way so that it's a little bit easier for you guys to follow along since you don't have that preset saved. Bring that sharpness to, like I said, where I had it. There, then the texture, take that on up there, take the clarity on up there. And like I said, just touch up some of those little areas where you want it to pop just a little bit more. Right around the face is typically going to be the areas that I really try to address the most because the eye of the subject. Just like you want to nail the focus on the eye, you also want to draw the eye of the viewer to that area when you later on when you go to make a print or when you post it. You know, so adding just a little bit of extra pop there, like I said, around the shoulder, around the eyes, those little areas are going to draw the viewer's eye right there. So I'm pretty happy with it here. Now the additional thing, if you guys noticed on one of the other the sample images that I gave you, the finished one, it's quite a bit there we go. All right, sorry guys, my computer's going slow today. But as you can see, so this background is just is quite a bit cooler than in the original raw file. But I stopped cooling here, and the reason overall on the picture, and the reason why I did that is because I don't want to cool the bee too much more. If you cool the entire picture too much, then the colors within the bee will start looking a little bit unnatural. And because that's my primary subject, as you get, okay, now you guys can see it a little bit better. So like I said, the colors start looking a little bit unnatural. And so I want to try to keep the natural colors on the bee. And so now what I'm going to do, just like I did an adjustment brush to bring out the details of the bee a little bit extra, now I'm going to do the same thing, use an adjustment brush to change the temperature of the background. And so what I'll do is go up here to temperature, and that's already set to a little bit cooler. If yours is set to a little bit warmer, dial that down a little bit cooler. And what's cool here is that you guys can see what I mentioned earlier as far as the sliders. This is in the main adjustment for your white balance. If you're working just with a JPEG or with a TIFF, you actually still have temperature. But if you're working with a JPEG, this is all that your slider is going to look like. You're just going to be able to dial it up in increments that, like I said, aren't quite as meaningful as having the exact temperature that you can set it to. But for this simpler tool, it's fine. And so, like I said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to adjust the temperature of the background a little bit more to cool it down just a little bit more, because like I said, I still feel like it's a little bit on the warm side. And as you go brushing around, you'll start seeing how it starts turning a little bit more green. And don't be afraid to, if you go over the bee a little bit, you can go back and erase where it has covered the bee a little bit. I'll bring down the size of that a little bit though as I get a little bit closer, because I don't want to go too far over the bee. But like I said, if I go a little bit over it, it's okay. And plus, on these legs and on the tongue, they're basically black, so the temperature is not really going to matter that much. It's really more on its body that I'm concerned with, making sure that the temperature is correct there. So there we go. I'm getting pretty happy with that. Now what I might do also is bring down the exposure just a little bit more there, and just make it so that it's a little bit more balanced. And if you look at the histogram, now the histogram is starting to look a little bit more balanced as well. Like when it was not adjusted, it was way up here, extremely bright, and so I'm getting a little bit happier with how that histogram is looking there. And so I'm also going to bring down the luminance of the greens just a little bit. Come back down here. And then I think one more thing that I want to do, now that if you hit right here where it says show selected mask overlay, you're going to see red over everywhere that has been covered with the current mask that you've added. So you can see it's red pretty much everywhere except for right on the B. Let me zoom in there just a little bit more and make sure. If you need to erase, just hit Alt, and it turns the plus in the middle of the your cursor to a minus, and so it subtracts. And so you could, if you want to get any specific details that you feel like got a little bit too much of the background adjustment, you can do that there. But I don't leave that on for very long. Also, I don't leave that on for very long because, like I said, I like to edit based off of how it's looking altogether for me as a composition. What I do think I want to do is brighten up the B just a little bit more, and so I'm going to go ahead and lighten the B. And again, like I said, I'm not being super precise here. It's okay. You can touch that up a little bit later. And then just after you've added it to the B, then you can crank it up a little bit more. A lot of times though, when you brighten up like that, you lose some of the contrast. And so I'll sometimes go back and add just a little bit more clarity. I like clarity over contrast because clarity does more adjustment to the midtones, whereas contrast is more of the blacks and whites. And so clarity looks a little bit more subtle. Another option that you can use is the dehaze. That will also add a little bit more contrast. I'll wait for that to settle in. And especially, like I said, just when you're touching certain areas up like that, it'll really make it pop a lot more. And then pretty much the last thing that I'm going to do is vignetting. I like to put a vignette on my images. It just adds another area where you're drawing. It helps draw the eye a little bit more to the center of the image or to the subject. I don't always use a vignette, but I'll typically try it and see if I like it. And I more often than not end up using a bit of a vignette on my images. And so you go with a darker vignette by dialing down, brighter vignette by going up. Selecting the midpoint is basically how far in that vignette is going to go. You can go all the way down to 0 or all the way out to the far edges. I typically bring it in a little bit because then what I like to do is take the feather way up so that it's a real subtle vignette. It just real gradually goes from lighter in the middle to darker out on the edges. I'm gonna go one more time on that B. I think I still want to go just a little bit right there on the shoulder and on the face. And so right there on the shoulder and the face, sorry if I'm mumbling, I tend to do that when I'm editing. So I'm cranking up just a little bit more right there on the shoulder and the face because, like I said, I really want that head, the eyes to pop. I want the eyes to be drawn to the eye of the bee. And so I'll crank up a little bit more the exposure there. Bring up the whites just a little bit more, and now I'm really getting happy with it. I'm really feeling like it's getting just about where my previous finished one was. Couple more touches that I want to do to this. Oh, I wanted to also go back to address these areas that are overexposed. So I'll again choose these presets. Burn and lighten are within Lightroom just naturally, so you guys should all have access to them. But if you don't, for some reason, you can just go exposure and take the exposure down. Oh, well, I still got that one selected. So I'm gonna undo. I just hit Command Z to undo the adjustment that I just made. I need to make sure that I've got a new one selected here. So like I said, I'm gonna choose exposure, bring it down for it to be kind of subtle. So start at about -30. And then I typically take the highlights down by about 10 points, and same thing with the whites. And that's usually enough to get rid of overblown highlights as long as they're not real extreme. And so as we brush over those highlights, you'll see that red start to disappear, and you'll see some color and detail start to reemerge in the flower there. And so I just go through there and hit any areas like that that I feel that I can see are overexposed on the tail of the bee. And you can decide how much or how little you want, or you can start with a new brush if you want to get a little bit more on certain areas. I think I may have done something while I was editing. I think I may have accidentally, yeah, I went a little too far there. So I'm going to remove some of that, because you can see when you zoom in that around the bee there's a little bit of a halo, and so you can get rid of that obviously by just removing everywhere. Show the selected mask that's causing that, and just Alt to remove. And of course my computer's just going slow today. Probably time for a new one. Nobody ever complains. You complain about spending the money, but you don't ever complain about having a new computer. So, especially as a photographer, new camera gear and new computers are always welcome. Your spouse may not be as welcoming, but so I'm gonna bring this exposure back down just a little bit. I think I went up too high while I was before. I think I did that when I didn't realize that I was affecting this this adjustment. I was doing thinking that I was brushing something else, and I was actually brushing that. So anyway, like I said, I'm pretty much there. I think I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now, and so I want to have a little bit of time here at the end. I know it's getting 8:20, so I want to be able to have a little bit of time to answer some questions. I could spend, you know, another 30 or 40 minutes, and maybe even longer. If you guys are like me, you probably look at a photo multiple times over the course of several days, and go back to it and say, I think I want to adjust this or adjust that, and eventually end up with the image that you're finally happy with. But that's kind of my process there for getting an image to where it's ready to share. Now, I will do one more thing, and that's the settings for export, because I do get asked that a lot. Also, is that how do I get images that look so detailed that sometimes people say that it looked really detailed before I shared it on Instagram, but that the Instagram algorithm or this, that, or the other, that it loses its resolution. And I've always felt like that my images look really great on Instagram, And I think it's really just a matter of getting your export settings right. So when you export, pull down the file export menu, and in the format, make sure you choose JPEG. Make sure you choose the sRGB color space. You have Adobe RGB and ProPhoto. Display P3, I'm not really familiar with. It doesn't really get utilized. Adobe RGB is just a lot more colors. Adobe RGB is what I use if I'm going to send a photo off to the print lab to get turned into a photo, because it's a lot more colors and a lot more natural looking than sRGB. But you do have to make sure that you know your print lab. Make sure that your print lab can read the different color spaces. And because I have worked with some cheaper print labs that work in the sRGB color space, and you send them the file in Adobe RGB, and then the image ends up looking real washed out because it can't read all of the information properly. So make sure your print lab, make sure what their preferred settings are before you send it. But for Instagram, like I said, for the purposes of tonight, we'll just stick with that sRGB. I always set it to the short edge, resize to fit the short edge to 1080 pixels. Basically, you want the in the 4:5 aspect ratio, you want the bottom edge, or the shorter of the two edges, to be 1080 pixels. The resolution doesn't matter when you're dealing with a digital image. It matters when you're exporting for print. But like I said, for this, it doesn't, just leave it wherever it is, it's fine. I do add a little bit more sharpening for screen there. And then I add my logo as a watermark and export that to a folder where I can access it later and upload it to Instagram. All right, so there you have it. Definitely open to answering any questions that you guys might have about what I've done. I'm sure hopefully there's a few.
There's a couple. So let me get you to, I guess, pull down your screen, because there was 2 questions in here. The first one's from Jamie, and she noticed that you do have Topaz. So she wants to know, do you perform all of your sharpening in Lightroom, or do you use or save some on Topaz?
All right, I'm sorry, did you say go ahead and stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not a problem.
I think the questions that you can just answer. If you guys have any questions, this is a good time to put them in the chat for me. So let me start over. Jamie's asking, do you perform all your sharpening in Lightroom, or do you save some for Topaz?
Okay, so I typically, for this presentation, I wanted to use primarily Lightroom because before I got the Topaz software, I would do all of my editing in Lightroom, and I was pretty happy with the results. Since using the Topaz software, I use that the majority of the time, because I do feel like that it does the sharpening and denoising a little bit more intelligently, and I don't have to spend as much time dialing it in precisely right. It's like it gets it right. It is a little bit slower in terms of processing. Like once you've decided how much sharpening and how much denoising you're going to do, and you tell it to go ahead and apply it, it's a little bit slower than Lightroom. But like I said, the results are really really worth it. I think it does better. So what I typically do is I'll export it to the Topaz software. If it's an image like this, that's a noisy one or natural light, I tend to use denoise preferably. And then I might also sharpen a little bit in the sharpening app. But because denoise has sharpening tools, I usually end up pretty happy with it there. And then what I'll do when I pull it back into Lightroom is then I'll get an adjustment brush like you guys saw me do on the bee, and I'll add just a little bit more pop specifically on the bee, on any other elements in the image that I feel like that I really want to pop just a little bit more, and add just a little bit more sharpening, a little bit more clarity, and stuff like that for Instagram posts.
While we're talking about Topaz, Egidia is wanting to know, while using Topaz Sharp AI, do you sharpen before you start editing or after the edits are in Lightroom?
I'll typically adjust first, make sure that I've got my exposure and contrast where I want it, because when you export to Topaz, you can export it as a TIFF is what I typically use, because it's the least destructive. But I try to the temperature and the exposure and the contrast, I go ahead and try to adjust those a little bit first before exporting to Topaz, because like I said, once I export to Topaz, now it's a TIFF file that I'm working with rather than the original raw file. And some of those adjustments I prefer making to the original raw file, because they're a little bit smoother and more natural looking.
Okay. Camille has a question which I like, so thanks for asking, Camille. Is there ever a situation where you would adjust your tone curve, and then how do you decide when to use that or not?
I've watched some tutorials on the tone curve, and I feel like that I get essentially the same thing out of the sliders, and I got real comfortable with using the sliders. And so I've never really spent a lot of time dealing with the tone curve. So I prefer to just stick with adjusting the whites and the blacks and the shadows and the highlights, and essentially getting what I want out of that. I know, like I said, I've seen some people make those adjustments with the tone curve, and I think it really comes down to preference of how you get used to editing. But I don't utilize it that much, but I think it can be just as effective, if not more.
Todd is wanting to know, do you use color grading in Lightroom?
No.
Okay, that was easy. That surprises me too. Yeah. Okay. I think there is one more question in here. Let me just double check. So John is wanting to know, how do you get focus so sharp on the eye of the bee?
So, I mean, that's a combination of two things. One, it's making sure that you nail the focus on the shot to begin with. And then, like I said, so like when I take the pictures to begin with, if I'm shooting with natural light like that, if I'm shooting with natural light, I'm typically going to use the burst mode or the continuous shutter mode on the camera, and I'll go at the fastest setting that it has and rattle off about 3 or 4 shots. And then I'm going to look at those and find the one that is the most sharp on the eye, and that's the one that I end up keeping. Now at this point also, I don't just want an image that is sharp. I want something that's a pretty composition. So I'm looking at both of those things when I take that into consideration. But like I said, that burst mode or continuous shutter mode can really help. Though you don't have that luxury though when you're shooting with flash. Those of you guys that have seen my previous or some of my other webinars know that I'm doing a lot of flight photography now with flash, and you get one click because of that flash. You might be able to rattle off a couple, but primarily it's one click and one shot. And so it really I use the selective spot autofocus, and I use the smallest spot that I can possibly use. And so I try to pinpoint it on the head of the subject when I'm using an in-flight subject. If it's a stationary subject, which we didn't really cover tonight, and like I said, it's not the big thing that I'm known for, I'll typically use manual focus instead of the spot focus, just so that I can, and then use the focus assist so that it adds a little bit of color, to the area that it's fine tuning the focus on, and that way I can be real precise on where I want to be.
Okay, that is all the questions I see in the chat. Jose.
Yep.
I love having you here, and I really, really am grateful that you take the time to walk us through some of your processes here, from the first time that you were here, where you kind of shared how you shot your subjects and how you the equipment you used. So if you guys are wondering, how did he get this bee so sharp, or how does he get these insects in flight, check out that first video. It's on the YouTube channel. And then this one comes back and just kind of just closes it and takes us all the way through the post-processing part of your creative process. So that's super, super cool that you did that. Before we close you out, is there anything you want to, final thoughts that you want to add? Or I know that you mentioned earlier that you are thinking about doing that workshop. So you're going to come back or you're going to shoot me a note somewhere sometime and let me know what that is. And I'll share it with the group, whether it's in our happiness hour section, or even I'll mention it on the show. Anything else that you want to add before we shut down?
Like I said, I'll announce that hopefully next week.
Okay.
A big part of why I haven't announced it yet is because I'm going to be at the Bluebonnet Festival in Chapel Hill this Saturday. I'll have a booth there, and so I definitely want to let people know that I'm going to be there. I'll have some of my prints there in canvas and metal, and then traditional prints as well. So if you're in the Chapel Hill area, or can drive there, it's a fun, great event. I don't know what it's going to be like this year. This is my first year doing it. I was signed up last year, was going to be my first year, and then COVID shut it all down. So I imagine it's not going to be as big of a deal as it's been in past years. But like I said, I would still love to see you guys if you want to come out to that. My Instagram account is at jmadimages, JMAD_images. Look me up on there, and do not ever hesitate to ask me a question. I don't always respond like immediately because I don't live on Instagram, but I do get on there every day, at least for a little bit. And if I see a question, I'm always happy to answer. I know that I kind of ran through as I was going through, I was realizing that there was probably some things that I could have explained just a little bit more about thinking about time and thinking about the process and all that versus just thinking about explaining it. So I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, any things that you guys may have seen that, like, well, what about some of the other filters, the gradient filter or the circular filter? Do you use those? And yes, I do use those, and for different purposes and different times. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions. Also via email, jose@jmadimages. There's no underscore on that one. It's just jose@jmadimages.com. And that's also my website, jmadimages.com or pollinatorportraits.com. It was originally jmadimages.com, and I switched it to Pollinator Portraits, but either one will take you to the same spot. So you can go to my website. You can follow me on Instagram through there. You can email me through there. So I'm always happy to help and answer questions. And hopefully you guys got some good information that you can use. Hopefully you learn how to use some of the tools within there, and you're already thinking, oh, I can't wait to try to apply that on my own pictures later tonight.
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you guys didn't already download those images, you can get those from my website, lindanickell.com. Go to the schedule. You'll go to Jose's class description, and there's a link to a Google Drive that includes all of those images that you can download and practice on. So, and I will also link all of his contact information on the YouTube video. So one more time, it is jose@jmadimages.com. That's his email. jmadimages.com is his website. And if you're on Instagram, please give him a follow at jmad_images. So with that, Jose, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. And it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I wish you only the best. I was actually in Chapel Hill this past weekend, and I cannot think of the restaurant that I ate at, but it was fantastic. So that's a great little community. And right now, the bluebonnets along 290 are starting to pop open, and so you need to get out there if you're in Central Texas area. Get out there. So next week, Alabama.
Can I share something real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm going to share my screen again. I want to show everybody this this picture that I captured out at my property. I'm always learning new stuff, and one of the things that I learned more recently is that there are different species of bluebonnets that actually qualify as Texas bluebonnets. I think there's 6 different species, and I had always noticed that the bluebonnets on my ranch looked a little bit different. And finally this weekend, I decided to do a little bit of research as to why. And I realized that what I have on my property are the sandy soil bluebonnets, which are a little bit longer and skinnier than the traditional bluebonnets that people think of as the Texas bluebonnet. And they don't have the big white crown up at the top. But what was really cool, and the thing that I wanted to share, was that I happened to find one of the white variations, and it was just growing right there in the middle of these blue ones. And I thought it made just a really pretty composition. Unfortunately, I never saw a bee visit it. I don't know if I camped out there for about an hour. I wanted a shot of a white bluebonnet with a bee on it, and unfortunately, I never got a bee to approach it. But if you guys looked at my Instagram, you'll see a picture that I did get very recently from that day that I shared. I think I actually went with a fuller composition like that for the final shot. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. Like I said, the bluebonnets are when you said the bluebonnets are blooming, I was like, yeah. And I've got that really cool white one that. And the other thing with the sandy soil bluebonnet, what I also learned was that it was the original Texas bluebonnet until 1971, when the state legislature made it that any of the 6 species that grow in Texas are the official one. And so my property has the original bluebonnet on it, all over it. Not the one that you don't see it as commonly on the sides of the roads. You really need very sandy soil, and I have that on my ranch. And so I thought that, like I said, that was pretty cool. And let me stop the share here.
Well, maybe next year your workshop should be during bluebonnet season, because in May it's going to be a little too late for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what you will, so in the bluebonnets are pretty to shoot, but they're really hard to get bees in flight on. They move real quickly from one flower to the next. In May, what you're going to be able to see, the prickly white poppies that come up around late May, early June. That's what you're going to see when we go out in the morning. The bees, they'll be like 4, 5, or 6 of them in one flower. And then they'll pop up off of it and hover in space there, because they just get covered in pollen on those. And so you get some really cool moments for shots there. And that's part of why I want to utilize that weekend. As well, the dragonflies are out at that time of year. You don't really see too many dragonflies right now. So,
do you have a water source there?
Yeah, I've got a good sized pond there. And so most of my dragonfly photos have been captured right around the pond there as well. So
perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jose. All right. Next week, Alabama-based landscape photographer John Sharp will be here to present aspects of making a grand landscape image. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.